Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. We have done it. We have finally made it. NFL draft week is finally upon us this Thursday, the first round of the draft. Obviously Friday, Saturday as well. I will be up all night Thursday night and then literally probably about half an hour after the draft finishes, hopping in my car and driving to the airport to catch a flight. So obviously hoping for a good night with those Browns 2 first round picks to make that flight a little bit more enjoyable rather than, a flight of despair, depending on how the night obviously goes. But as I said, NFL Draft Week is here. I have got some great content every day dropping this week, leading up to the draft, mostly from a conversation that I had with my go-to NFL draft expert, Jack Brentnall, who had quite a few surprises, shall we say, on his big board amongst the consensus this year. So really interesting conversations. Dived into the offensive tackle class, wide receiver class, because of course that is all the talk with the Browns draft this year. The top of those classes, his top guys at those both position groups. Spoke about what he thinks the Browns should do with those first two first round picks. Give his thoughts on it. And talk about some day 2, day 3 targets for the Browns as well. But today's video is the offensive tackles and wide receivers. Get Jack's full thoughts on these guys, and I can promise you that this was done before I gave him any of my thoughts on the offensive tackle wide receiver discussion. I didn't want to poison the well. I just wanted to get his objective view on both of these position groups in this year's draft before we then dived into me trying to poison the well and seeing what he thinks we should do in the draft and what I think we should do. But obviously, as I said, this first video today is him giving his unbiased, objective opinion on the top of the offensive class and wide receiver classes this year. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with NFL draft expert, and I do say expert, Jack Brentnall. Welcome back to the channel, Jack Brentnall, my go-to NFL draft expert when it comes to the NFL draft. From the touchdown, I believe, is where you do the bulk of your work. So before we get started, guys, go and check out the touchdown. They've got their really, really good draft guide. Very, very cheap as well. Very good value for your buck. One of the best draft guides out there. And also, Jack does have his top 100 players out there as well. Make sure you go check that out before you get into any of these conversations that me and Jack are going to have. But Jack, thank you for giving me what little time you must have this time of the year to talk about some of these guys. First and foremost, just how are you doing it? 1 week away from what is the biggest event of the year in your kind of timeline with the NFL draft.
Yeah, it's always an interesting time of year. I think obviously it's a 365 thing for me with the draft.
Yep.
So it's always exciting when it gets to this time of year, and kind of that's all that's on everyone's mind. Free agency's out of the way, everyone's kind of glued to the draft. So it's nice that it's finally rolled around. It always feels like it takes forever. I suppose for a lot of people it doesn't, because it only comes on the radar a little bit later in the year. But an interesting class as well. So excited to talk through.
It must be annoying for guys like yourself when you see all the kind of, shall I say, fake draft guys like myself. I'm not throwing any shade to anyone else here. I could definitely put myself into this group. That, don't get me wrong, I'm doing not a fraction of the work that you're doing throughout the year. And then obviously when it comes down to draft season, draft kind of, this period of the off season, everyone starts to jump on Twitter and pretend that they've been doing this all year, and you must be there going, guys, I actually have been doing this all year. So as I say, when it comes to the draft, Jack knows his stuff. No one better, especially not in the UK, than Jack. So as I said, check out his stuff. But going to talk about a few things, do a few videos, and I'll jump straight into this first topic, which is the offensive tackle versus wide receiver class. And you said it was an interesting class. It is a very interesting class, where it seems similar to last year, where, well, maybe not quite as similar, but some of the top positions aren't exactly, shall we say, the premium that we've seen in other years in terms of quarterback and offensive tackle, whatever. But I think what's getting a lot of interest, and obviously especially within Browns corners of the internet, is the wide receiver versus offensive tackle class. Before, and I kind of mentioned to you off camera, before I try and poison the well and throw my kind of thing in it, I want to get Jack's objective thoughts on this offensive tackle and wide receiver class Just so that any Browns fan out there that is maybe touring between the classes, get Jack's thoughts on both those classes at the top. Before the next video, I'll try and get Jack's advice on what the Browns should do in terms of drafting any of these guys. Where, as I said, I might try and poison the well a little bit. But just starting with a generalisation of both classes, where do you see these classes? Are these classes that are maybe strong at the top, weak at depth, weak at the top, strong at depth? Where do you see both classes being at as kind of a general consensus among other draft classes?
I think that both of them, there's no blue chip guy, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of the big ticket thing is there's no blue chip player at the top of either of these classes. There are some really good players in there, and I think if you look at that offensive tackle class, yes, there's no blue chip guys, but in terms of my board, I've got 7 guys with starting grades, which is not bad for an offensive tackle class. Often you're looking at maybe 3, 4, maybe 5. So 7, is certainly not bad at all. Wide receiver, I think, is a kind of similar situation where, okay, you've not got the blue chip, but you do have some guys who I think could be quality starters. What I would say, though, about, I suppose, both of these groups is, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 guys, these are players at premium positions, but they all have fairly large question marks. Or maybe more question marks than you expect for a lot of guys getting talked up as top 10 picks, which I think makes things a little more complex than previous years. A lot of the time, if you were drafting at 5, 6, 7, 8, there's going to be enough guys there that you're like, okay, I'm happy. It's just which one we take, but they're all probably worth it. Whereas this year, it feels like they could be, but there's more risk attached to some of those guys, I think.
Yeah, and I have the same view on this class. I've been, since October, especially at the wide receiver class, kind of been complaining, shall we say, that I just don't see any of these guys as true top 10 picks. Whether or not they are top 10 picks in this draft is obviously a different question, because obviously every draft is different with the players and the value. But I just think in terms of, in a vacuum, these just aren't what prototypical top 10 picks at wide receiver. The only guy for me really that I see is in that mould, if healthy, which is a big if, is Tyson. And it's someone that is just, if that's the guy at the top and he has that big of an injury concern, it does kind of show you that, as you kind of said, there is not really any blue chip talent at the top of, and that applies to the offensive tackle side as well. Just to get your thoughts on the top guys at both, obviously, positions, starting with offensive tackle, because this is a really interesting one with where you have as your offensive tackle 2 that I've seen going around, which I think is obviously probably a big difference from a lot of the consensus. So just first and foremost, who is your top 5 tackles in this draft?
Yeah, so OT1 for me is Francis Mauigoa from Miami. OT2 is Blake Miller from Clemson. Those are both in what would be my kind of high quality starter tier.
Yeah.
And then there's a small gap to the next tier, which is kind of good starter, which is Caleb Lomu from Utah, Spencer Fano, also from Utah. They are literally 15 and 16 on my board, so you can kind of have either of them, whichever way, it doesn't really matter. Monroe Freeling from Georgia is then OT5 for me.
Yeah, see, and I mentioned it there. Big difference from consensus, and I won't get into it too much now until the next obviously topic. But anyone watching that knows my thoughts on these guys, probably quite a big difference from how I have these guys as well. With Blake Miller and Caleb Lomu, I think you're obviously, well, not obviously, clearly a lot higher on than the consensus, and myself included. Caleb Lomu, I'm very intrigued by. He's someone that I would, if we're talking 24, whatever, as I said, don't want to get too into much of it now, but that I would be interested. But Blake Miller's one for me that, and I feel like it's, as I said, I think this is the difference between someone like yourself that is watching these guys all year versus someone like myself that, I'm not watching Clemson every week. I'm not watching.
Lucky you.
Yeah, lucky me, to we say. And kind of when I get to this draft thing, maybe, you've got to be careful to, I feel like at this time of the year, the good gets amplified, and so does
Yep.
the bad. And I think when it comes to Blake Miller, for me, I see the good. Don't get me wrong. You see, I mean, the physical tools are clearly there. This is a guy that's what 6'7", not to do the meme, but obviously, prototypical build for the tackle position. Started like 53 games, no injuries really at all.
Yep.
Clearly a guy that can be available. And then I kind of see the cut ups from the run, and that's what it's always been for me. It's like, and I see this guy as a pass blocker, and then I see the cut ups from the run blocking side of it, and I'm like, how do these two things match together when I see someone that has that much starting, under his belt, that much experience, and I'm kind of like, I don't understand how it could be unrefined in this area, which does then slightly worry me to that extent. Do you think I am being very unfair with that, and I'm completely overblowing that with Blake Miller?
I don't think it's necessarily completely overblowing it. I think he is definitely a much better pass protector than he is a run blocker. I think as a run blocker, I think the thing for me is he wants to finish. Like he has more of a. I think maybe the consensus has miscast him a little bit as a really athletic, kind of more of a finesse type player, which is where I'd kind of bucket a guy like Caleb Lomu,
Yeah,
where it's like very athletic, doesn't really have the drive and desire to kind of finish in the run game. Miller does. I think the challenge is that he's so keen to finish that sometimes that gets in the way of playing with the right technique. His punches can be a little wide. He can overextend, which is where you see some of those kind of pretty rough losses. But I think for me, it's a guy, like I say, he's playing at Power 4 school, over 50 starts. He's played the most snaps of any player in Clemson history, not a non-special teamer. He missed one practice in his entire
yeah,
college career, and that was because he
yeah,
broke his wrist,
yeah,
which is crazy. He only missed one practice and didn't miss any game time. I think he's a good athlete. I think the testing was good there. Like you say, prototypical build, very comfortable pass protector as well. So for me, there is obviously going to be the debate around, okay, well, he's a right tackle,
yeah,
and for some that's more important than others. I don't see much of a value difference between left and right tackle, but I think depending on which team you're talking about, if you are looking for left or right tackle, as much as I value a right tackle, if the right tackle is great, I value them as much as a left tackle.
yeah,
But if you need a left tackle, I don't really want to draft a guy who
yeah.
played right tackle his entire career and move him. It can work, but it's just you're adding an extra layer of things for them to learn as a rookie, which is the challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's probably come up a lot with Blake Miller and the Browns. Obviously, we went and signed, well, I say signed, traded for Titus Howard. The expectation is that he will play right tackle. So a lot of people naturally will go, well, we need a left tackle. And don't get me wrong, I don't get caught up in that. I'm the same as you. I mean, a great right tackle is a great tackle. I kind of view it as that. But, especially coming from the team that tried to do this with Jed Wills, I do have those concerns sometimes about moving a guy, and especially about moving a guy that, it's not like maybe like a Fanu who did play left tackle his first season. He literally only played right tackle, Blake Miller. So you do obviously have those concerns, and I think some people are kind of looking at that and going, well, maybe that's a reason not to draft him. Maybe that's played into a role for me. But, I mean, if you're looking at a guy at 24, maybe if he's there, going by your board, he certainly wouldn't be. But if he was there at at 24, I don't think that the kind of right versus left thing becomes as big as an issue. You're more just looking at the talent at tackle, and Titus Howard's someone that has played left tackle and has played even guard. So if you have the versatility, if you are in love with the player. But I just thought it was really interesting that you had him at number 2, which I think is a lot higher than obviously most people do, and obviously that's why I wanted to start with that. But Francis Mawanoa is your OT1. He's my OT1 like now, if that makes sense. I think what I kind of get caught up in, and I kind of explained this to you last year, is that I can get a little bit too much into the upside stuff, which is why someone like Monroe Freeling, I have as that guy where it's like, well, he's not OT1 today, but I can easily see him being OT1. Francis Mawanoa, to me, is the best offensive lineman in this draft. He's the best football player right now today, as I said, on the offensive line out of any player in this class. What's your thoughts on him and kind of where he stacks up as these recent tackles that have come in?
Yeah, very very solid, very dependable. I think he's not in that kind of the guy you're going to call as your kind of cornerstone like.
Yeah,
You think of the guys who maybe in the last 5 years, like a Penei Sewell or
yeah,
like that kind of player. He's not in that tier. But but I think he's very good, very reliable. I think his hands are really polished, really good lower half, really good anchor strength. I think you see the power in the run game. The Texas A&M game rather was a brilliant example of kind of him just moving guys against top competition as well in the college football playoff. Um, I think he's pretty light on his feet in the run game as well. Miami will use him kind of out on screens in front. I think he looks comfortable there. The question is going to be, is he a tackle in the
Yeah.
NFL? I think he is. Um, but I think he would also make a very good guard. Now, the challenge is, if you're picking top 10, do you want to take a guy who might not be a tackle? Now, like I say, he is just enough ahead of Miller that I'm like, I'll stick him and keep him at OT1.
Yeah.
And I think he is like O-line 1,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
wherever that is. I think that's the main question. Like, the foot speed is fine. I don't think it's elite. So I think you'll see him, if he's going against those true speed guys, there will be some challenge there. Now, depending on kind of how you run your offense and what scheme you run, there's things you can do to mitigate that, obviously. Um, the arm length is fine, but not amazing. So, yeah, like I say, there's enough there that would keep him from being like a true tier 1 guy for me.
Yeah.
But I think like the tape is just really clean and polished.
Yeah, I mean the tape's to me the best in, as you say. I mean it's the best in the class. It's why I have him as that kind of O line number one out of any of centers, guards, whatever. I know some people might have Ione above him maybe as an O line overall, but I think Francis Mauanoa is the best offensive lineman in the class today. But again, there are concerns, as you said. Does he play guard? Does he play tackle? I think that will come down to maybe value game there. What do you value as a team? Do you value maybe a potential Pro Bowl All Pro guard maybe, or do you value a really good tackle? I mean, it depends obviously where you are and what your team needs, etc., etc. But I think with a lot of these other guys, that can obviously be a detriment to some of them, but I do think in some cases it can also be a bonus when you're looking at positional versatility, and especially in the modern NFL with how these guys and just how injured these guys seem to get in recent years on these offensive lines. Having that versatility to move around the line could be something that teams value. Do you have more concerns about Mauanoa playing tackle or Spencer Fanu playing tackle?
They're probably kind of even, but for different reasons. I think obviously, yeah, Mauanoa is more like, has he got the athleticism and
Yeah,
the kind of foot speed to mirror? With Fano, the arm length is more of a concern. It's always difficult weighing the arm length this year and last year because the way the combine has done it has been really odd. Like, these guys are all measured shorter than
yeah,
they should be. So he definitely probably doesn't have the arm length that he was recorded as, but he does have short arms, and his frame is much more slender. Now, I think if he were to move inside, I think he's probably more of a centre than a guard, um, which I suppose that will knock the value a bit because I'd probably value guard slightly more than centre.
yeah,
But I think like with Fano, there's absolutely no doubt the athleticism is top tier. He is such a natural mover,
yeah,
really good redirectability. Grip strength is good. His run blocking tape looked much better last year than this year. There was a bit of a shift in the scheme at Utah because they got a different quarterback who was much more
yeah.
of a kind of running quarterback. So if you watch his run blocking tape this year, a little more disappointing. But there's kind of enough I've seen in 2024 that makes me think there's probably something more there if you get him in the right kind of scheme.
Yeah, and then to round off the other two guys in your top five, what makes you have Caleb Lomu above Monroe Freeling?
I think for me, so they're both kind of similar in terms of their athleticism. I think they're both very good athletes. I think Lomu's hand usage is just excellent. I think his eyes are brilliant. Um, his issue is more power, whereas I think Freeling's is, I think he's got more weaknesses in pass pro. I'd say I think they're both very good in pass pro.
Yeah,
I think he has much more in the way of like technical flaws. They are more fixable, I suppose. His hands in the run game tend to be quite low and quite wide, and he is tall, like he's 6'7", so that does hinder him in terms of leverage and kind of that ability to then, because he's playing tall, not always is able to displace guys in the run game. he will drop his head a lot in the run game as well, which is frustrating because obviously if you're not looking at the guy trying to block, you're not going to be able to control the block.
Yeah.
Um, and he will overset in pass protection, so you'll see him getting beaten inside. I don't quite know why he does it because a lot of the time when you see guys do that, it's because they maybe don't have the athleticism, so they're trying to compensate.
Yeah.
So I think that's the kind of thing that you could probably fix and coach out of him. But that did lead to some kind of ugly wins. So there's definitely coachable stuff there with a guy like Freeling. And they are in the same kind of bucket of prospects.
Yeah.
Lomu's 15th on my board and Freeling's 19th. So when you get to that group of three, it is kind of like, kind of pick your flavour, really.
Yeah. And I would say that I think the reason probably why consensus, maybe myself, I say maybe myself, the reason I would have Freeling above a Lomu, and I think a lot of people, and why I think Freeling will get drafted higher than Lomu is literally what you just said there, is that with Freeling, it feels like more of the weaknesses are more coachable things that in 2 and 3 years down the line, if you clear them up, then you've got a great player there. Whereas I feel like with Caleb Lomu, don't get me wrong, similar athletic profile. This is a guy that I could easily see being a good tackle in the NFL. But maybe, you said kind of there the lack of power. I think for me, the lack of play strength kind of shows up in certain areas as well. This is a guy that is he going to get moved around? And you kind of mentioned there with the desire as well. So I feel like that's the two kind of differences with those guys. Where, as you said, on the same kind of tier, but maybe people think, well, with a Freeling, they feel like the weaknesses are maybe a bit more coachable. Just to round off the tackles before we go into the wide receiver, just two guys that I think are probably like the biggest wild cards, shall we say, at this tackle position, and that is Max Hatshaw. I definitely just butchered that, and obviously Caden Proctor.
Yeah.
Where do you kind of view these guys, and where do they fall into this offensive tackle class?
I have second round grades on both of them. Both kind of, I think they're both starters.
Yeah,
I think they need more work than those other guys we talked about. Iheanacho is an interesting one. He born in Nigeria,
yeah,
very late to coming to the sport, so he is really excellent athlete.
yeah,
The challenge with him is, I think, again, it's like Freeling, but more so.
yeah,
You don't see great displacement in the run game. His hands are often his undoing. Often gets like really wide in terms of where he lands, which means he just kind of can't sustain and control blocks. And he does get beaten through his chest. His hands are often really late in pass pro. That was an issue in college. It's going to be much more of an issue in the NFL because you're seeing these big, strong edge rushers every single week because that's how the NFL's built. But I think the tools are there. He's built like a
yeah,
prototypical tackle. Really explosive, really great footwork to mirror. So I think there's something there. It's one of those how much do you trust your coaching staff type guys.
yeah,
And then with Proctor, I mean, yeah, this is one of those where like he reminds me a bit of Mackay Becton when he was coming out. Like
yeah,
he's huge. I mean, he's 352 pounds. He's he's a weird one because I've ummed and ahed about whether he's a tackle or a guard. I think he's a tackle because moving a guy that's 6'7" into guard is not something I'd really love doing, and he really is stiff in his lower half, so he doesn't bend.
yeah,
Which, if you're on the interior, that's going to be way more of an issue when you're going up against these guys who are just getting up and under your pads.
yeah,
He's super explosive though. I think he doesn't redirect well in space, which I think is why some people see him as a guard. Um, but his explosiveness out of his stance for his size is mad. I can't think I've
yeah,
ever seen anything like it. But if a guy then tries to work his inside shoulder, he kind of falls apart. So
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
unbelievably physical. If you're running a downhill run game like run scheme, and you want to just kind of beat guys up at the point of attack, Proctor I think could be brilliant. But he's going to be very scheme specific, and there'll be some teams that'll love him, and others will just be like, no, he's off the board.
Yeah, I mean he's the biggest boom or bust for me in this tackle class, and I think that's
Yeah.
why you see such the variation. I mean, God forbid he's been getting mocked to the Browns at 6 in the last couple of weeks, which is just some people seem to be that higher on him than others, which probably would be worst case scenario for me. Not to make any spoilers, but yeah, I think that Max is someone that you could easily see just being one of those guys that as you said, new to the sport, not just so unrefined, but has all of the physical traits that you look for at the position. And that if he does go to the right team, I mean, I'm looking there at Philly at 23, thinking, that is, they've done it before. They're a team that
Yep.
knows what to do with one of these guys that is kind of a ball of clay. So, if he goes to a team like Philly, I could easily see him being one of the better tackles in this class 5 years down the line. So, interesting to get your thoughts on those tackles. So going on to the wide receivers, again, I'll ask you the same question. Who are your top 5 wide receivers in this class?
Yeah, so wide receivers. Wide receiver one is Carnell Tate from Ohio State. Wide receiver two is Makai Lemon from USC. Wide receiver three is Casey Concepcion from Texas A&M. Wide receiver four is Jordan Tyson from Arizona State. And wide receiver five is Ted Hurst from Georgia State.
Very, very interesting as always. And
Yeah, that there's a bunch of guys. When you get to wide receiver like five, there's
yeah,
like four guys that are all within like a tiny bit of my grading scale. So it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
depending
yeah,
on what day it is,
yeah,
I
yeah.
could have any of them at five.
Yeah, and I mean, Carnell being number one will, of course, be music to the ears for many Browns fans that are obviously Ohio State fans. Anyone that's watched any of my videos will be laughing right now, obviously, with my views on, I say my views on Carnell Tate. But I think it's, you're going to get dragged into these draft wars where I think people think that I believe that Carnell Tate is a bad prospect. I don't think Carnell Tate is, of course I don't. He's a first round wide receiver, a really good wide receiver, plays for my favourite college team, etc., etc. Why is he your number one, I suppose I should say?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one is that there are fewer question marks with his game
Yeah,
than there are with the other guys in that list. Coming into the season, I had Tyson number one.
yeah,
Um, the he wouldn't if you took away the injuries, he still wouldn't be my wide receiver one, but he would be higher up. I think he'd probably be without looking at my sheet. I think he would be touching wide receiver two with Lemon.
yeah,
Um, Tate for me, I mean, he's got the size, which is not a lot of the guys in this class do. He's built like your kind of prototypical boundary receiver. I mean, he's a little skinny, but he's got
yeah,
the height and the length. Um, I think for me, he has those things that I look for when it's translating to the NFL, which is can you can you win as a route runner, not just as an athlete, but can you win in terms of how you beat guys? Are you manipulating them through the route? Are you winning at the line? Are you creative in how you kind of create your self separation? I think his hands are some of the best I've seen in recent years. He is incredibly adept at kind of adjusting to balls, playing through contact at the catch point. He's a three-level threat, which again is something I'm always looking for. It's not just those guys who can win underneath; he can win downfield. He was consistently able to do that in college. He might not be the biggest speedster, but like we've seen this time and time again, where these guys come in the league and they're maybe not going to run a 4.3, but they're technically refined and they can win that way. In some ways, there is differences definitely, but in some ways, his game reminds me a bit of Devontae Adams. I think he's definitely nowhere near as good after the catch as Adams was, certainly in his prime. But in terms of that catch point skill, the fact that neither of them are burners downfield, but they are just always getting open. Like I say, yeah, a little limited after the catch. Frame is a bit on the skinnier side, but that's kind of it really when it comes to weaknesses for me, which is why he's just kind of wide receiver one by default, I suppose. Um, can you hear me? I don't know if you just see my message. I've lost you. I I don't know what's gone there. I can see you, but I can't hear anything.
Sorry. I've accidentally muted my mic. Sorry, guys.
No worries, no
My
worries,
bad,
no
my
worries.
bad. No, I was just saying that I think with Carnell Tate, he's the safest receiver in this class. I think that's why a lot of people, and it makes sense that, if you are going to go with a guy, especially in the top 10, do you just go with the safest guy? But then I think what maybe people like myself and what others get caught up on is, does he have the highest ceiling? And if you are drafting top 10, that does, as I said, I'm big on upside. That does come into play for me. Mackay Lemon is someone that I think might have the kind of biggest kind of variation of where he could go out of any of these guys. I feel like this is a guy that might go like top 10, like, maybe 8, 9. But I could also see maybe being later in the teens. I think he kind of has the biggest variation between any of these guys. What's your thoughts on him, and why do you think there is that kind of variation with him?
I think the size won't be for everybody. I think not everybody's gonna. I mean, he's not built like Tate. He's not built like a traditional outside receiver. I think that's less of an issue with how the NFL works these days. I don't think teams are lining up in the way they used to, and kind of more static looks. We've just seen Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's kind of a similar type size, dominate the NFL. Coming into the league, he was tagged with being a slot only player, like someone called in Lemon. It's not been an issue in the NFL. To be honest, if you look at some of the guys that have come in recently, like even first rounders like Zay Flowers, for example, who's even smaller, he's playing on the boundary now. So I don't see as much of that, but I think there will be some who are more traditional with how they view that. So I think they'll maybe see him more as a slot, and that will maybe knock his value down. But I think he's just very refined, really good hands, really good route runner. He's really quick. He's maybe not like fast. I mean, the 40 time that he did at his pro day, we can kind of throw that out because the technique was all over the place. But like when you watch him on tape, like he's not a burner. He's not a guy who's going to be like a 4.3, maybe not even like a low 4.4s, probably more like a 4.5 flat. But he's so quick in short areas, and that's how a guy like that wins. So for me, and he's tough. Like that's another big thing. Yes, he's not the biggest, but he's tough. He will fight over the middle. Watch the Iowa game. He was like bodying guys at the catch point that he had no right to do. He blocks like so hard, which maybe it's me being a Packers fan, but I really value that in wide receivers. Like if they're willing to block and they're willing to do the dirty work, that's really important in the NFL. And then he's also like a really good creator after the catch. He's a kick returner in college. You can see that in how he creates after the catch. So the size is going to be not for everybody. Obviously, not the biggest catch radius. He's not going to win against press if you want to line him up on the outside. But like, you'd be misusing him if you did. So I'm not going to knock him too much for that, because you're then just kind of viewing him through what I think is the wrong lens.
Yeah, and you kind of said it there, throw out the 40, but some people put a lot of stake into that stuff, and they're going to go, well, maybe if you do have these other things, you are a slightly smaller guy, I want that 40 to be higher. But as you said, at the end of the day, if the guy looks explosive on tape, I think you take that into account more so than you do a 40 time that we don't even know if they practice for. We don't even know the circumstances of, was he planning to do it and then just thought, I'll do it. You never know with these things. So Mackay Lemon is someone that I think top 10 does worry me slightly, just because, as you kind of said, there are those limitations there, but someone that I would be more than happy if the Browns were able to get back in, let's say, like a trade back scenario. Jordan Tyson is, I think, the biggest kind of, not wild card per se, but I think just because, this is a guy that you said you had as your wide receiver one coming into the year. This is a guy that I think is all year, if the health wasn't a concern, is the only kind of guy that I viewed as like, okay, I can see him as being that kind of prototypical top 10 pick at wide receiver. And I think for me, it's, Carnell Tate, I would probably argue, is a slightly more diverse route tree. But I think with Jordan Tyson, the route running is also excellent. But also, I think he just adds that slightly more explosiveness, shall we say, that slightly more, whether that's after the catch or whatever. I don't know what it is, and I just think he just looks a bit more fluid. And I can see why some people were doing the Justin Jefferson comparisons. I'm not saying that he's obviously going to be Justin Jefferson, but he does have that similar kind of mold where he's not the fastest guy, but he's explosive enough and creative enough as a route runner where it just looks easy for him getting open. And he's someone that as I said, I think he's always been the one guy that I've been like, if it wasn't for the health, I could see him being that top 10 pick. Do you think the health is going to be the reason why he isn't?
I'm interested to see where he goes, because I mean, it feels like every day you open up kind of Twitter or read anything online, it's like one day people are saying he's going to fall out of the first round, and the next minute like he's going to be back in the top 10. So I have no idea. And I think it's one of those things like this is true of any guy who is maybe an outlier, whether that is injury history or size or whatever it is. You only need one team
Yeah,
to be like, I'm fine with that. Right?
yeah,
I'm fine with the medicals or I'm fine with this or whatever. I think he'll go. I do think he'll go first half of the first round. Um, I just think it's one of those where, from what we're hearing, like there's a consensus in the league, rightly or wrongly, that they are more comfortable with his injuries than maybe I am.
yeah,
They obviously have loads more info, um, so maybe there's more that they know. I think that the thing, if you were selling yourself on Tyson, for me is his injury. It's not like a repeat injury. It's not the same thing over and over
yeah, yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah,
So I mean, it's serious stuff. Like it was torn ACL, MCL, I think the
yeah,
PCL as well
yeah,
when he
yeah,
was at
yeah,
Colorado. Broke his collarbone last year, and then hamstring injuries this year. Um, Now the hamstring, I think he's tweaked during the pre-draft process, which is why he's not tested until recently. But
yeah,
I suppose from that sense, it's not like a degenerative issue or like a particular issue that you're like, okay, he's torn his ACL twice or
yeah,
anything like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
You'd leave you really worried. Um, but I think, yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think his route running's good. He's explosive, as you said. I think his hands are good. I don't think they're necessarily as good as Tate's, but I think they're good.
yeah,
Um, Three-level separator. His
yeah,
creation after the catch was much better last year, I thought, than this year. I think again the hamstring probably played a part in that. But if you watch I want to say it was the Arizona game last year, there was some really great kind of creativity after the catch. So I think he could be one of those where it all depends on your appetite for risk. I
yeah,
could see him
yeah,
being the best receiver out of this class. I don't have him as that. Like I say, that's partly due to the injuries. Um, but like he's I think clearly the kind of guy who has the stuff you want in a
yeah.
player you're going to take in the first round.
Yeah, and just to try to go, I got caught up on this a little bit because Jordan Tyson, and with Carnell Tate Carnell Tate as well. It was like you look at some of the data and it's like, well, the data's this hard data is suggesting that Carnell Tate is better after the catch than Jordan Tyson, and I'm just like. I've watched these guys. He's not better after the catch than Jordan Tyson. Like as much
Yeah,
as I love Carnell Tate, and I don't understand. So that's one of the few times where I'm big on analytics where I'm like that doesn't make any sense to me.
yeah, it's one of those where like you look at it when Tate does get those opportunities after the catch, like his quarterback is very accurate, so
Yeah,
he's getting the ball in a way that is going to allow him to create after the catch. Tyson, his quarterback, is not very accurate,
yeah,
and he will make plays on the ball that he is like contorting his body, winning with body control. But then he's not in a position to easily then transition upfield and make plays. So I think it's one of those. I think that's the perfect example of where I'm with you. I think analytics are a really big part of any evaluation, but that's why analytics and tape always have to go together because
yeah,
if you take just what you can see in terms of the numbers, it isn't telling the full story. I think Tyson is better after the catch
yeah.
than Tate. I think that is one of Tate's big weaknesses. Um, so I think yeah, it's just one of those where once you see it on tape, you're like, okay, I can understand why.
Yeah. But speaking after the catch, the guy that you had, was it number 3 you have on your
Mm,
list?
yeah,
Someone that I'm a big fan of, I'm really, really intrigued in, is someone that if the Browns do go for that kind of offensive tackle first or another position other than wide receiver, someone that I would then spend the rest of the draft, well, the rest of the first round sitting there going, please let this guy be there at 24. And that's KC Conception, who firstly, we're calling him KC Conception. I think his name is just Kevin Conception and his nickname is KC. So we're actually technically calling him Kevin Conception, but I'm fine with that. This is a guy that I think probably offers what arguably the most after the catch kind of, production, shall we say. I think I saw somewhere that he was averaging like 7 point something yards after the catch, which is pretty insane. What makes him your wide receiver 3, which is obviously higher than a lot of people have?
yeah. I think really good athlete, really explosive. Probably the best kind of just stop start quickness in
Yeah,
this class, and that's something I think that's really important. We often lose track of where speed matters with receivers. We get excited by 40 times, which are important to a degree, but I think it's far more important to be able to stop and start. It's not just running in a straight line; it's that
yep,
ability to kind of get to your break point, hammer down, and then get out, which is why like a guy a couple of years ago like Lad McConkey I thought was a really good player because when he was at Georgia, like he's not like the super speedster who's going to always win over the top, but he's just so quick in and out of his breaks. And Conception's are very similar to that in that sense. I think he's a really good route runner. His releases are way better than a lot of guys his size in terms of how he wins. Really quick feet, good hands, and as you say, creative after the catch. When he was at NC State, he was, I mean, he was getting like all sorts of weird usage. They were kind of giving him, they were using him as a running back at times.
Yeah, yeah.
He was getting all sorts of design touches. So just a player who wins before the catch and who wins after the catch. So it's like, okay, that's a really easy thing to buy into. I think he could be like he's going to be a bit landing spot dependent, perhaps in terms of what he's asked to do. But there are certain teams I'm just like, I think he could be a really big contributor early on in his rookie career.
Yeah, and I think the reason I like him so much as well is when I'm looking at him for the Browns, I'm looking at Todd Monken and what he likes to do with these wide receivers. We looked at what he's done with Zay Flowers, and I'm just like, I just think this guy just fits so well into this offense and just has so many of those traits that someone like a Todd Monken would look for in a wide receiver. You know, a lot of people like, you know, they want to say like he's on the smaller side. He's under 200 pounds, but he's still 6 foot. It's not like he's a Zay Flowers where he's like what 5'10".
No.
Like he's,
No.
and you know, and so I think people get caught up on that. They're not quite looking into the actual testing data, etc. But yeah, really, I'm glad that you're as high on KC as I am because, as I said, I'm just such a fan of his, and every time I watch him, I'm just like, yeah, this is someone that I want on my team. To round off both positions, to round off obviously this topic of the video. Obviously, I'll let you do your Ted Hurst little thing of why he is your wide receiver 5, which of course I think you might stand out as maybe one of the bottom 1% of people that have him as your wide receiver 5 that high up, but someone that I'm a big fan of, someone that I wanted to bring up when we talk about day 2, day 3 targets, but. If everyone catches on to what you're thinking, and I don't think he will be available then. So why is he so high on your board?
There's just a lot of the stuff that I'm like, okay, that's just a big tick, right? So 6'4", 206. So okay, you've got the size. I think he's a smart route runner. You see real good detail in terms of how he attacks DBs. His breaks are remarkably like snappy and smooth for a guy who's 6'4". Most guys who are 6'4", they are not going to be able to win kind of in and out of breaks because they're often like high cut and struggle. He's really explosive as well. You see him kind of stacking against press coverage. His 40 time was obviously really good. The broad jump kind of was testament to the explosiveness there as well. And I think he's good after the catch. He's got like a nice blend of like physicality but also elusiveness, which gets me excited. Now, there are drops on tape, and he's not always consistent at working kind of back to the ball through contact, which is weird for his size. He's kind of like, in some ways, it's that back to front thing where he's 6'4", so he shouldn't be snappy as a route runner, but he is. But then he's 6'4", so he should be good at playing through contact to the catch point, but he isn't. And then obviously the obvious thing will be level of competition. I thought he looked good at the Senior Bowl, but he played at Georgia State in the Sun Belt. He's not, and before that he was at Valdosta State, so he's never really been kind of tested against top competition. When he did, he wasn't very productive. Now Georgia State were a train wreck last year, so like he didn't really have much of an opportunity when he got those in those big games. But I think the physical traits, the combination of route running and after the catch stuff has just got him, like I say, just ahead of guys like Omar Cooper for me. Yeah, and obviously, as I said, it's similar with the offensive tackle. Very interesting on both sides to get your thoughts on both of those positions. And just to round it up with a kind of summary answer, would you put one of these classes ahead of the other in terms of overall strength at the top? I would have a slight edge to the wide receiver class, but it's not much. I have 3 guys in my top tier for wide receiver and 2 for tackle. So it just gets there with wide receiver, but they're both kind of in a similar bucket to me.